Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new and you like to hear about opinions, reviews, and analyses on films, books, and TV shows, be sure to hit that subscribe button for more content from me. Today's video will be on The Good Girl's Guide to Murder Trilogy by Holly Jackson. Every time I go onto the Indigo website to check out books that I can add to my ever-growing TBR, I keep seeing this trilogy popping up. And whenever I scroll through Bookstagram too, it's like being recommended by people. So I decided to check it out and see whether it was worth the hype and the recommendation. So let me begin with a spoiler-free review. Overall, I will say right off the bat, I loved the trilogy. I will say too that I did not think, after reading the first book, that a sequel was necessary. But the more I read the second and third book, the more I realized how wrong I was. The sequels add so much depth and complexity to these characters and the mysteries that you thought were already solved. It's completely brilliant, and I couldn't put down the second and third book to the point that I must have finished reading them in the span of a day. That's not to say that the first book is boring, far from it. It jumps straight into the mystery of what really happened to Andy Bell the night she went missing. I also loved the format of the first book because it's told in a conventional narrative format, but it also jumps into entry logs for Pip's project. I personally thought that the entry logs were a great format because it allows a better insight into Pip's thought process instead of just doing a regular monologue. And speaking of Pip, I liked her as a character. She's capable, smart, and persistent, but she's not a know-it-all. If she was, I never would have finished the first book, let alone the trilogy. But she's awesome. So overall, I loved the first book, but the second and third book really picked up the intensity and pace. I'm not complaining because I was hooked, but damn, did they go from 0 to 100 in the last two books. So the second book, instead of a narrative and an entry log, it's now a podcast, which is still just as interesting. Plus, I loved how the cast of characters we were introduced to in the previous book were also in this book, and you're really able to see them as well-developed characters, not just random characters there for Pip to interact with to solve the mysteries. By the time the second book ends, I did see the need for a third and final book. Which brings me to the third book. Still insane and somehow even more fast-paced than the second book. I really want to go more in depth, but it'd be spoiling. But the third book is when the tone and mood of the book really changes, and it takes a turn that you somehow don't expect, but also it makes sense the longer you think of it. Overall, I just really love the trilogy, particularly the second and third books, and I would definitely recommend reading it. I do wish there could have been a fourth book, but I also do love the way the trilogy ended. So now that we're done with the spoiler-free review, I will be giving my thoughts and reactions to specific things in the novels. If you don't want to be spoiled, feel free to skip this part of the video. Since it's a trilogy, I'm obviously going to list my reactions book by book, so let's begin with The Good Girl's Guide to Murder. When I was reading it, I almost did believe the theory that Andy Bell was alive and faked her death, but to have them reveal that it had been Becca who killed her and the reason behind it, yikes. That was a twist I didn't expect. That being said, I did think that the first book wrapped up the mystery quite nicely, so that's why I was confused that there was a second and third book, because what else is there to explore? Then we get to Good Girl, Bad Blood, and then I see that, yeah, there's definitely more to Pip's adventures that we need to explore. And I did love how they brought in the title, Good Girl's Guide to Murder, as the name of her podcast. Maybe it's just me, but I love it when you see the title in the actual story. That being said, I do love that they explored the downsides of being a detective like Pip. So the media was coming up with conspiracies regarding Jamie's disappearance, and they believe that Pip made it up because she needed a subject for her podcast. It really shows the double-edged sword of fame, since Pip obviously became more famous when she solved Andy Bell's murder mystery. And we begin to see her coming undone, which makes sense because this is traumatic, what she was going through and what she had gone through. So obviously it's taking a toll on her. Having them bring back Stanley Forbes, who seemed like a minor character in the previous book, and having him be tied to the current Jamie disappearance was absolutely brilliant. And the twist about his past, it was bonkers. That being said, it was really traumatic that Pip had to have him die in her arms, so this was yet another event that pushed her to the edge, which all culminates in the final book, As Good as Dead. I feel like if the first book was going 10 kilometers per hour, the second book was going 40, and then the third book was going 100 kilometers per hour with how intense and insane it was. She really unravels from the very beginning, and the tone of the third book was a lot darker than the previous two. Like, we see Pip dealing with PTSD and having a stalker. Like, it's dark as hell. What I did love was the twist that Jason Bell, aka Andy's dad, was a serial killer who was never caught for his crimes, because his criminal history ties into the events that led to Andy's death. Everything was connected, and that was just so insane, and I loved it. What I also did not expect was Pip killing him. Like, I remember reading it and I'm like, am I tripping? Like, is she dreaming? Did this really happen? And then to frame Max for murder because he got away with his own crimes because he's rich. Bonkers, I'm telling you. But I was holding my breath the entire time that she and Sal were trying to come up with their alibi to ensure that they would get away with Jason's murder and pinning it on Max. And then it dawned on me the title of the series again, The Good Girl's Guide to Murder. And I thought it was just going to be like the title of the podcast, but it's very literal. Like, Pip, the good girl, murders someone, and at the end she gets away with it. I do think she was right to kill Jason and pin it on Max though. Jason clearly wasn't going to stop and he was about to kill her, and Max's victims were let down by the justice system. So if anything, she killed two birds with one stone, murdered a killer and pinned it on a rapist. One guy's dead and the other is going to jail. I was so thrilled that she actually got away with it in the end. So with that, I wanted to see like how people reacted to the ending, and apparently there's been a lot of readers who claimed that Pip getting away with murder and even committing murder was very out of character. I personally think that this was a natural progression of her character. Like, she was unraveling and going through a downward spiral. Jason's murder was sort of in self-defense, sure, but she's also been let down enough times by the police that she ended up taking matters into her own hands. I can't blame her for that. Even more, Jason and Max were rich white guys that got away with their crimes for years. The fact that they got their comeuppance at the hands of a 17, 18-year-old with one of them dying and the other being sent to jail, I thought it was poetic justice. They victimized women for years, and their downfall was at the hands of a woman. Also, please get that morally good protagonist puritanical BS out of here. After what Pip has been through because of those guys, like, she deserved a little murder as a treat. Also, Pip and Ravi getting away with murder and implying to get back together at the very end. That's what Joe and Love wished they had in you. You know, if Joe wasn't a coward. Anyway, this was a wild trilogy and I had a blast reading it, especially the last two books. Overall, The Good Girl's Guide to Murder was worth the read and a good BookTok recommendation, and I would also recommend you read it if you're into murder mysteries. I will admit that I was a little meh after reading the first book, like, okay, it's good, but I probably won't read it again. But the second and third book really saved the series for me, and the chaos and unhingedness of the third book was what made me fall in love. Like, there's a lot of twists and turns that kept me hooked, but they're not done for shock value. Like, they made sense. Holly Jackson, you have a new fan in me. After reading the trilogy, I pre-ordered her new book, 5 Survive, which is coming out in November. I might do a video on it maybe next year since I've already scheduled my videos for the rest of 2022. And that's a wrap on the Good Girl's Guide to Murder trilogy. My next video is going to be up by early to mid-November, and it will either be on Do Revenge, Rosaline, or The Mummy. We'll see how I feel in the upcoming weeks. Thank you so much for watching, and please don't forget to like, comment, or subscribe.